My name is Anne Elgood. I'm the senior curator at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. The artist is Hany Armanious, who was born in Egypt and immigrated to Australia with his family when he was quite young. Hany is a sculptor who is very engaged with the process of casting. He finds objects, often discarded objects, or everyday objects, things that we all, see and interact with in our daily lives. And he casts them in various materials, but often a polyurethane resin, which has this way of looking really exactly like the original object. So it's this funny kind of disconnect between the fact that you're looking at, let's say, a table or a woven basket, and at first glance it appears to be the thing itself, just sort of a ready-made that's been taken off the shelf and put into the space. But in fact, he has gone to great lengths to make a cast, an exact replica of that thing. What's interesting about his casting is that it's in fact kind of the opposite of what casting is normally used for. So, for example, casting, of course, is a way to make multiples, to make many, many objects from one object, make many replicas. But his casts are always unique. And in the process of casting the various things, he often destroys the original object and the cast, the mold itself in the process. So what you're left with is only this one cast of that particular object. So it takes on a kind of aura, I guess we could say. And there's a way in which, because it's a cast, upon second glance you start to notice things about this object that are different than what you imagined initially. In a way, what Hany does is he creates objects and he puts them in dialogue with one another, creating a kind of constellation of things that interact with and kind of bounce off and talk to one another. And in some cases he does it very deliberately. A piece will be sort of looking in some sense at another piece. In this show, there are a number of different, very brand new pieces, and then we're borrowing a couple of works from earlier exhibitions, particularly a show that he did here in New York last year at Foxy Production. One piece that speaks to this question of looking or the gaze is a piece that he showed at Foxy last year called Effigy of an Effigy. And it's a sort of large, I don't know, maybe 3 feet tall replica of a Picasso head of a woman. So it has this, almost cartoonish kind of bulbous nose, this figure, and she's sitting, resting on the floor. She's carved out of styrofoam and then cast in resin, and she's staring at a table with a kind of cheap crystal-like vase that's very strangely kind of taped down to the table. But all of those elements, the tape, the vase, the actual table, those are all cast also from resin. So it looks to be a bunch of different materials, but in fact it's all of a piece made of in one material. And so here you have this recognizable kind of modernist iconic image staring at what's kind of a crappy, nothing. In a way, it conjures up a lot of ideas about what it means to look. This Picasso head seems to be looking in a very earnest way at this object, fascinated by it somehow. So the object that typically is being gazed upon, the Picasso, becomes the protagonist, becomes the gazer. He also is very interested in methods of display and taking the object of display and turning it into the object itself. So another piece that we're borrowing from earlier work is called The Birth of Venus, and it's a cast of a plinth, just literally like a white painted wooden plinth that was used at some point to display another object. That object is no longer there, and you just have this sort of forlorn, kind of beat up old plinth resting on the floor, and that becomes, again, of course, it's cast out of resin. You really notice all the scars of its past life and the way that it's meant to be something that becomes invisible when you're looking at an art object that would have been on it, but in this case it becomes really the object of your attention. Some of the new work that he's made, there's a kind of, in a way, a sort of centerpiece work that's called L'Inez, which is borrowed directly from Giacometti's The Nose, very iconic sculpture of the very phallic and kind of grotesque face with the very, very long nose that is displayed in the open sort of cage-like form. So Hany's interpretation of this piece is he's created a metal cage, but he's cast a leaf blower out of resin and hung it in the cage just as Giacometti's face is hung in a cage. And so he's really translated the body, in this case, into a machine. The form of the leaf blower is very much like a gun, and so there's a kind of a tension in the work. And in a way, I think when you look at Giacometti's Lanese, you also have this sense of a rifle or a gun, because the mouth is gaping open, almost like, you know, where you would pull the trigger. And so there's a lot of humor in that work, but there's also something kind of daunting, almost aggressive about it. I work with living artists, and, you know, in a way it's the best job in the world, because I get to always be working on projects and always in very direct dialogue with artists, looking at and talking with them about what they're making and why. In a way, my job, of course, is to advocate for those artists that I work with, and to also act as a kind of a guide, in some cases an interpreter. With contemporary art, and particularly the kind of art that I'm interested in, I think there's a lot of room for interpretation, a sort of open platform in which different people bring different things to it. But it's always kind of a pleasure and an honor to be able to be one of those interpreters and to talk about what it is I think those artists are doing that might have meaning for people in the world.